Harmony, stronger together.
Mass incarceration and what that looks like here and what it means and how it has come about and how it is still affecting people in negative ways in their life.
Another difficult conversation we're going to be having is environmental justice that feeds into environmental racism and the people who are most vulnerable and the people who are most affected by environmental racism and how we can begin to uproot the systemic injustice.
Speaking of systemic racism, my subject will be privilege that perpetuates systemic racism.
My subject will be unjustly poor and homelessness and reparations.
And mine will be segregated communities and safety, education, and opportunity.
My subject is policing and community, and just finding ways how we can make a more perfect system.
So today we're going to just talk within ourselves, within the leadership of the Harmony Conference, about why these difficult conversations are so important to have. While now more than ever, we cannot shy away from having these conversations. And we're going to talk about what makes the conversations difficult and who should be invited to the table. And, how do we make sure we monitor our own character in order for every voice to be heard, whether we agree or disagree with the voice. So my question is to the Harmony Conference leadership. Why is this important? Why are these conversations important? Why is it so important to talk about the history and the roots of mass incarceration, of privilege, of environmental racism, segregated communities, unjustly poor? Why is it so important to have these discussions and to invite people who are in leadership doing on the field, to tell us how to uproot these injustices?
I believe it's extremely important because of the statement, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. As long as you're willing to let something to be happening in someone else's backyard, and you're fine with it, as long as it's not in your backyard. You're only asking for it. The same problems to come to your back door when you are not in recognition of someone else's plight and somebody else's pain. It also speaks to the soul of each individual and the soul of our nation, because we've already seen so many things that will be evidence for where we know we don't want to go, what we don't want to do, where we already went wrong at, where we've already caused trauma at, where there are people lacking because of the previous traumas that came before. So the injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere statement is what that question leads me to, that, because as long as you're okay with somebody else's kids being in cages, then don't be mad if your kids end up in cages. And if you're okay with seeing people die, then don't be mad. Now, the craziest thing is what kind of world do we live in if everybody an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? We don't want that kind of world, and that's not who we are. So the conversation is important because as long as we're willing to see it somewhere else, then we're also calling it to ourselves.
I'm going to jump right in behind you. It's something I've been researching lately around societies and how, from the Methodist tradition, the father of Methodism, they had groups, and society is one of them. I'm not quite sure if John Wesley saw it the way that we see our society now, but societies were faith and Christianity and other religiouses were put in place so that our societies could be healthy. And so in our way, we have lost our way when the church is no longer, and I don't want to attack the church, but I want to say the important part that the church plays in society is very relevant, because we find God where people meet each other. And when people are not able to come together and meet each other, there we cannot have the presence of God because they're not there. And although we have people that come from all different backgrounds that shape who they are and what they believe and how they live their lives, it's very important in this time, for the sake of humanity, as we see so many different things going on, and I'm sure we're going to further discuss climate crisis, and for the sake of evolving and becoming a better human race, a better, and it's just one tribe, humanity, to be to walk into a better tomorrow. I think it's very necessary that we have conversations like this with many types and different people who have different experiences, have different faiths, because that's where we find, that's where we meet God with one another, and also how we reimagine or how we create the type of world that we want to see.
You know, for me, it is a lot like baking something fancy. Is if I look at the entire recipe and it's just overwhelming. I can't do any of this stuff. And if I break it down into steps, I can do the first step. And I think we've gotten to the place in our society where people with differing needs and have decided that the big statements, Black Lives Matter or systemic racism, are something they can attack, and there's a group of people who believes that they are telling them the truth when they say these things are wrong, these things are bad, blah blah blah. But if you take it apart and say, okay, we're not going to use those statements that are buzzwords for you. We're going to take it apart. We're going to talk about mass incarceration. We're going to talk about why certain neighborhoods are not safe, why education is not equal, how environmental justice impacts people's lives. Then you can start a conversation with people, and you can bring them into your tribe, which is a tribe of people who are working to be educated and people who are working to make the world better. And because one of our big problems right now, and this is according to John Haidt, the psychologist, the sociologist, is that one thing that's more important than facts or almost anything is your tribe. And it is so difficult to get people blasted out of their tribe if that has become their identity. And so we need to start in some small way a new tribe that invites everyone in, and where people can start to hear things that they wouldn't hear in other ways.
That was great. I'm like piggybacking on what Sharon just said. I wanted to speak about the country, the United States of America, the building of the country, and where we see ourselves moving forward. We can't allow our country to be hijacked by its past. We're supposed to move forward. We're supposed to get better and be better. I feel like as a conference, as a Harmony conference, it's our job to help assist us. Learning from our comings is so important, and not repeating them. So yeah, I'm fully on board. I totally understand tradition. I'm a proud American,
I love what you said about being a proud American. And I think a lot of people, I'll just jump in until he comes back on, unless Tom wants to speak to it. He's our vet.
Yeah, okay. I'm the one who had the topic of privilege that perpetuates systemic racism, and I think we're being polite by just saying privilege when actually it's white privilege. And me, I'm the representative for white privilege, and I didn't even realize that I had it until fairly recently. And I was shocked when I was first told that I would get to represent white privilege. But when I thought about it a little bit, I said, you know, that's true. I can see that about my life and my upbringing and the communities where I was raised. And it was a privilege, no doubt about it. And I was unaware of things that were going on in our country, things that had happened throughout our history. And I mean, COVID-19 has occurred at the same time as this racial violence has led to a moment in American history that we are all a part of. And with COVID, I talked to a friend of mine from the Navy easily 10 years ago. Another white guy like me, junior officers, and 10 years ago, I said, you know, Bob, I said, things are so bad right now, 10 years ago, that I think the only thing that could bring us together would be a natural disaster that was so huge that it could not be ignored by anyone. And that would be our opportunity to come together. And then the pandemic happened. And I thought, well, here's our opportunity. That feeling lasted about a week. And then that was over. And that became politicized. And this is the denial going on politically, as was mentioned earlier, that 40% of Americans, we can't even agree on facts anymore. It's hopeless. It's impossible. I live with a person who is as far right as Attila the Hun, as far as I'm concerned, and we are so far apart as to only be able to hear each other if we shout at each other, and that doesn't work well in terms of harmony. So I'm hoping that we can do a little better than that. Okay, and so we'll see how that goes. And I'm going to leave it for the moment.
Yeah, Tom, I'm just piggyback on what you said. How do you talk to, someone? And do we just leave them out? Do we just choose maybe not have the conversation with those who are so opposite? I think it's so important to continue to invite all minds, all thoughts, all hearts to the table, whether they agree with me or not. But my question is, what is the way in and what is the way forward? I heard what Jermaine said about not allowing our past to define us, but me as a historian, also as, it's so important that, and I heard a wise man say, it's so important that we learn from the stories of the past so that we cannot make the same mistake over and over and over again. Because stories have a conflict and a resolution and a lesson, to learn from. So this writer has said how important it is for us to learn from history stories so that we can finally have a happy ending, so that we finally can put humanity first.
But that was one of the reasons why we came together with Harmony Conference to create a space where all people would feel safe to speak, you know, everybody, it's interesting. You say something and people can't agree on facts and everybody has their own truth. However, creating a space when it comes to fellowship and relationships, people learn better in safe environments. And sometimes part of that safety is just first being in relationship with them. Like, I know you and you know me, and you know that my heart is not to hurt you. And even though we have grandiose differences from one extreme to the next, I'm of the conclusion at this point, like, we talk about what is normal, and I was listening to a minister this morning, like, we don't want to go back to what we assume is normal. As a people of faith, we've got to come together in ways where we don't have to agree. We don't, but we sit, we listen, we talk to each other. The Bishop's Convocation, they brought in fearless dialogue, and I thought, wow, for such a time as this, how necessary that is, to be able to you speak and then you hear someone else speak, and for your own individual sake, you have to find your own way. However, we do have to agree as a community of what we think is acceptable and not acceptable. At the end of the day, you know, people don't even understand why people are saying things like Black Lives Matter, when statistically people don't understand how the history of police in this country has perpetuated a certain, has presented itself in a certain way in the community of Black people. And so again, we are pitted against one another, and in order to stop that, you know, this side or that side, or choose, you know, we have to be able to communicate with each other and agree on things like, you know, the killing or violence against any person should just not be right. Basic humanitarian things.
I wanted to jump in, but when Tom was talking, he talked about, you know, he's speaking, and he's speaking with the voice of, and coming to the understanding of white privilege, and he said the words are taken lightly. You know, he said, I don't want to quote you wrong, Tom, but you said you feel like it's a little light to just say white privilege, but for me, I remember the little girl in the vulnerable places that I was, and I think that hearing each other's stories, you know, to come together is a matter of actually hearing each other's stories and then being able to identify how those things that are being told in the stories of each individual's life. And I identify with the little girl right now who may be collecting lunch from the government, and really food vulnerable, and area where this person lives at is dangerous and has high risk of many things. And I identify with that, the humanity of each individual. And I love what Jermaine said, talking about Harmony Conference, going back to Harmony Conference, because harmony is a sound, it's a vibration, and it is voices coming together, bending so that they sound good together. And it makes me think about the scriptures, you know, those things that are good and are perfect. So most people should be able to find in their humanity those things that they consider good and perfect. Hearing each other's stories is a way to hear and have empathy and sympathy and understanding for someone else's plight. So being able to have the conversation, the hard conversations, is to be able to listen to each other's stories and to find the good and pile on as much good as we can. And to also, like Valerie said, you know, I've asked that question, is there a universal ethics that we should all follow, where, like Valerie said, there should never be okay for anybody to have violence put on them. But those are the kind of things that coming together in one mind, coming together and harmonizing in conversation about what is good for us, what's good for our nation, and what's good for each individual. And then hearing those stories and identifying not just with our privilege, but also with the stories of people who are oppressed, and how those oppressions came about, and how do we fix it? How do we heal the wounds of those oppressions that were put in place systematically? how do we point them out? How do we identify them? So Harmony Conference talks about those things of how we can identify them, and also how we can take the bad notes out and harmonize together, have understanding for each other's plight, and put out a good vibration that promotes a brighter day, a lift, a crescendo, a growth, a symphony. You know, and the more people we can grab to come and join our chorus with what we talk about, because it's important and it's prudent for the case of the one who is most oppressed, which is the story of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. We're all called to tap into ourselves and recognize that God is, you know, there is a higher power calling us to a higher place. So I just add that. I just wanted to say that because I just feel like we were talking about how we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation by calling people to our choir of harmony and talking about those things that are hurtful to some, to many, to few, whoever. But if there's someone crying out, there's someone doing something about it, and that's us, Harmony Conference. So I just thank God for us, and I think that the way we have the conversation is we know that it's going to be hard truths, and we're not going to run from them, we're not going to tiptoe around them, and we're not going to coddle anyone. But instead, we're going to be honest, and we're going to be loving and empathetic and sympathetic. And that's the crowd in our tribe, people who want harmony.
One thing that gives me hope about having these conversations is when you listen to, there are two young women who used to be members of the Westboro Baptist Church. And they talk about how talk about a tribe that you are in and you are completely a part of it and you are not hearing anything else. And yet they are no longer. And the reason they are no longer is because people online were willing to talk with them and engage with them in a way that wasn't saying, "What's wrong with you people?" In a way that was letting them feel respected, letting them feel like they had worth, and looking at topics and unpacking things and saying, okay, tell me a little bit more about this, about why you believe this, about what this means. I want to understand. And then you're willing to listen to me say the same thing back. And one of them has a TED Talk now who says, quite frankly, you know, they didn't give up on me. They listened to me. They made me feel like I had a voice. And I started questioning and said, and talk about having courage to leave your tribe. Leaving their tribe didn't just mean leaving the tribe of a television station that's telling you certain things again and again and again and again and again, and all your friends listen and all your friends laugh at your posts and all your friends. That's a really hard tribe to leave. But if it's your family like Westboro, that's really hard. And I think that we start by saying, you know what, I see some hope in the statement, there's no such thing as systemic racism. Because take a step back and you're saying, okay, I think what I hear you say is, you're saying there's no such thing as systemic racism, but let's start with the most basic level here. Do you believe that racism is wrong? And so far, every single friend of mine on any side of the aisle, that is a given for them. Racism is wrong. That's somewhere we can start. That's a conversation we can start having, and start talking about specifics. And so that's kind of what gives me some hope, is seeing people who are very deep into a tribe slowly being able to hear something else.
Can I just jump in before Jermaine finishes his Proud American? And I know we don't have much time, and I love what you both just said. I was listening to a preacher, and I don't know the preacher's name. I'm not good at, writing everything down. And he was talking about how racism, since that you bring that up, Sharon, I love that, is wrong, and why it's wrong. And biblically, how Satan or Lucifer himself in our Christian religion tried to exert himself over God and wanted to be more than what God had made him. He was not pleased with it. He wanted something more. At least that's the story I get from the summary I get from my Bible as far as the role of Satan and why he was thrown out of heaven. Um, and that the ideology of I'm better than, I'm greater than, I'm more than has trickled down into our very human nature in ways that we have, this is how racism is able to continue to not to just live, breathe, and thrive. And that's a heavy topic, and starting there is definitely opening up all of Pandora's box, because there's so much that comes even behind that, the history and how it reinvents itself in ways that people don't even realize today. But we're going to cover all that, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, I kind of got cut off. I was saying, about being an American and how proud I am to be an American. And I see where we are now. And I guess what I could say is, I'm a pastor, so I'm going to quote the Bible. If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, turn from their wicked ways, I would heal their land. And basically, I feel like there's an unpacking that needs to happen for our country. I stand on the backs of slaves who are dead and gone, who spent their lives working for this American dream, whether they were slaves or free. They were working for the cause of this American dream. So I'm proud to be an American. But I believe that plagues don't go away with prayer. I believe plagues go away when you turn from your wicked ways, when we actually turn and we make a change. We repent. And I believe that there are people, there are Americans who are proud to be an American, and they're holding on to traditions that are no longer. I mean, everything that's in the past doesn't mean everything in the past isn't right. There was a lot of right going on in the building and the making of this country, as far as the creeds and the written down Declaration of Independence and Constitution. When you take those words, they mean so much if you look at them from the broader scale of things. Not thinking about the slaves that were working in the fields those days, but I mean really just saying all men are created equal. I believe that it's our job and it's our duty to hold those truths and stand firm on those truths. So yeah, there's a lot of unpacking that needs to happen for folks to even just sit at the table of being a harmonizer. We have to learn the song in so many in a way to sing out loud.
And
I hope you guys heard.
And adding to those truths, because not only men but women are all created.
Yeah. When I saw okay, so just to back things up, mankind is where my head was. It's not in any way sexist.
I wasn't saying. I was just adding on.
Then she would say humankind.
Yeah.
But we know the inclusive language.
That's not. Forgive me. That's not where my heart is.
I hear you. I hear you. I understand.
Yeah, all humankind. And maybe that's the change we need to make. In who knows? Maybe that's the change that we need to make. Moving forward. Language is important. And that's just. But yeah, I've come in contact with folks that don't want to unpack. They want to stay holding on to traditions that are just flat out dead wrong. And they feel like it makes them more of an American, makes them more of a patriot. And I feel like that's the step number one. Like Sharon was talking about tribes. Yeah, exactly. That's a tribe in itself. And, you know, I hear a lot of my black friends say, you know, the black young kids, like my son's age, my son even told me this. He's like, you know, a lot of these people are dying out. The people that think like this, they're dying out. But I was telling them to go a little further. You know, these are the parents of the young kids that are coming up. So, you know, that tribe is still in existence. It's probably not as prevalent or as vocal as it used to be, but it still is there. So there's a lot of unpacking that needs to happen when we separate tradition from patriotism and being an American.
Can I jump in really quick? I want to just piggyback on Jermaine's words, that willful ignorance. Because there is a need, though we are definitely saying, come to the table and have a conversation and let's talk. And then I call it the opt-out syndrome. Because I perceive it as this. I'm not going to say that this is what it is, but I perceive it as this. Because they're not head on with the oppressions that the one who is speaking out, black, white, purple, whatever. It's easier to opt out if it's not in your house or your backyard. If you don't gotta pray every time your kid goes and takes the car, and if you don't gotta think about what it feels like to be truly impoverished historically, it is very, very easy to opt out. And what I encourage for all harmonizers who want to be a harmonizer, there's no opting out. When I say coddle, I'm not saying we're not going to be nice. I'm one of them. I'm a nice person. I'll hug you. I don't even have to know you. And I'll love you while I'm hugging you. At the end of the day, when the conversations that are hard are brought to the table, there also has to be a receiving and accepting that there is more to learn, that we're all learners and teachers, and there is no opting out, especially when one cries out. That's what ethics teaches this, that when a person cries out, it's not about, hold on, why are they crying? It's not about, hold on, who is that crying? It's about, hold on, someone's crying out. Let us give our attention at first to the cry out, get the person off the ground, deal with their psychological after we provide the needs that are necessary for the deficit for how they ended up on the ground crying out in the first place. And let their voices be heard more than the voices of the people who are not crying out.
Wendy, let me interject there. You know, that's our voice. Like, we are the voice for the voiceless. And I think Sharon just had to pull out because she said she had to leave at 1:30. I wanted to see if Tom had any last words because I think he was the next person.
I do. And just a quick anecdote with a major point that comes out of it. I have one sibling, a brother who's 5 years younger than me. When I was 12 and he was 7, my friends and I took advantage of him, made fun of him, made him a scapegoat. We were not nice to him. By the time I was 13, something changed. First of all, I realized this isn't right. This is wrong. And secondly, I realized, you know what? My brother's going to be big, bigger than me. And sure enough, he turned out to be bigger than me, 6'4", 280 pounds. And I said, you know, it makes sense to start being nice. Now, we move all the way forward to the demographics of today and realize that 30 years from now, white people go from majority to plurality. That's by 2050. Another 20 years later in 2070, when all of us are gone, whites become the minority, okay? And maybe it's time for white folks to start to realize that maybe it's time to start being nice. Maybe it would be in our self-interest to start paying attention to what happened. It would also force them to, all of us, frankly, to look forward. Unraveling the past is a tough thing to do. And once we we, the harmonious group among us, is finally in the majority, that's the time that can really happen. This is the beginning. I envision this as the beginning, this conversation that we're all having right now. Mm-hmm. And things are going to change. So I don't know, Jermaine, I don't know how old your children are, but think about them 30 years from now and 50 years from now, okay? Mm-hmm. These are the people, and maybe that's the group that we really have to need to address, mm-hmm. the children. Because they're the ones that are going to put it all into practice. Trying to get people that are hardened in their views these days, I don't see it happening, frankly. I've come across enough white people that just don't get it and don't want to get it. But their children, that could be a different story. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So that's the conclusion of our meeting today. I've heard some key things. I heard Valerie say it's important to start relationships with people and make them feel safe and loved and hear them. And that's a place to start. I heard Sharon say that we are our one tribe, and I hear Tom echoing that as the demographics change in America, us becoming one tribe. I heard Wendy say that we do have to be the voice of the voiceless, and it's so important that these conversations are being made because there are people who are crying out. There are thousands of people who have been crying out, and the cry cannot be ignored. And I heard Jermaine say this is so important for our future. Although we are proud Americans, we have to realize that each American has invested in this country, especially Black Americans who have been traditionally oppressed. And it's so important that we are that harmonizing voice toward the future.
I am for harmony.
I'm for harmony.
I am for harmony.
I am for harmony. Yes.
I am for harmony.
I am for harmony. I am for harmony.
I'm here harmony. I'm here harmony.
We are for harmony.
We are for harmony.
Harmony. Stronger together.